The beginning of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt arose around the fertile Nile River Valley, which was the central axis for the development of Egyptian civilization. Around 5000 BC, small groups of hunter-gatherers inhabiting the region began to settle in fixed agricultural communities due to the drier climate that forced the concentration of populations near the waters of the Nile. Agriculture became essential, with the cultivation of cereals such as wheat and barley, and the domestication of animals such as cattle and sheep, driving the creation of villages that slowly evolved into cities. These communities began to develop more complex social structures with clear divisions of labor, and a religious system began to emerge. The figure of leaders, often tribal chiefs, began to gain prominence, and the concept of local deities linked to fertility and the Nile became consolidated, laying the foundations for the Egyptian polytheism that would flourish later. Furthermore, this period marks the consolidation of the idea of the Nile as a gift of the gods, an indispensable source of life, crucial to the culture and power that Egypt would come to have in the following centuries. As the organization of villages grew, exchanges between different communities began. Simple boats built from papyrus made it possible to trade along the Nile, favoring cultural and material exchange. The first forms of art also emerged, reflecting religious rituals and daily life. Ceramic vessels and stone jewelry are examples of these early cultural expressions. This period laid the foundations that would allow the transition to the pre-dynastic phase and the eventual unification of Egypt under a single ruler. Although it was not yet a state in its own right, the seeds of the great Egyptian civilization were being planted at this stage. Pre-dynastic Egypt. Circa 4000 to 3100 BC is the period before the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, characterized by the development of the first organized cultures in the Nile Valley. Two distinct cultures stand out: Naqada in Upper Egypt and Buto in Lower Egypt. The more advanced Naqada culture played a predominant role in the emergence of the future unified Egypt, with its social, religious, and artistic practices laying the foundations of what would become dynastic Egypt. Pottery was a prominent feature of pre-dynastic cultures, especially the red-rimmed pottery of Naqada, which became a status symbol. At this time, symbols associated with power and leadership began to emerge, such as depictions of fierce animals and warriors. At Naqada, elaborate tombs were built for local leaders, suggesting the beginnings of a more rigid social hierarchy and reverence for death, features that would be greatly developed in the dynastic period. It was in pre-dynastic Egypt that the first forms of hieroglyphic writing appeared, with symbols used to represent objects and concepts. These early hieroglyphs were carved into pottery and artifacts, and their evolution would accelerate in the following centuries, becoming a complex form of writing that was fundamental to the functioning of the Egyptian state. In addition to writing, technology advanced with the use of metals such as copper and the development of more sophisticated tools for agriculture and construction. Trade also flourished, with Egypt establishing trade routes with the Levant and other nearby regions, exchanging valuable raw materials such as semi-precious stones for manufactured goods. In the late pre-dynastic period, we see the first signs of a proto-unification of Egypt, with the emergence of leaders who claimed control over large areas. This paved the way for the creation of the First Dynasty and the beginning of the Age of the Pharaohs. Early dynastic period. With the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BC, under the reign of King Nama, possibly identified with the legendary Men's, Egypt entered the early dynastic period, also called the Thinite period. after the city of Thynis, from which the first rulers probably came. This unification was a transformative event, leading to the centralization of power under a single king, the pharaoh, and the establishment of an organized government. Narmer is a central figure in this process, being associated with the famous Narmer Palette, an archaeological piece that represents the unification of Egypt. From then on, the pharaoh began to be seen as a divine figure, the intermediary between gods and men, being responsible for maintaining order, Ma'at, in the kingdom. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic order and justice, came to guide both Egyptian politics and religion. During this period, there was a consolidation of state administration, with the creation of a highly structured bureaucracy. The nomarchs, governors of districts, nomes, emerged as key figures in controlling the territory and maintaining local order, reporting directly to the pharaoh. The centralization of power also allowed the financing of large architectural and funerary projects, including the first mastabas, tomb structures that predated the pyramids. Hieroglyphic writing flourished, becoming a crucial tool for administration and religion. Countless documents were created to record the pharaoh's power, trade treaties, and the first codes of law. The early dynastic period consolidated the foundations of the pharaonic state, a system that would endure for millennia, establishing Egypt's first royal dynasty and its traditions that would be perpetuated throughout all subsequent kingdoms. Third Dynasty. The Third Dynasty marks the beginning of what is known as the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BC, one of the most prosperous and innovative periods of ancient Egypt. This is a pivotal time in Egyptian history, with great advances in the areas of architecture, religion, and political centralization. The most famous figure of this period is Pharaoh Djoser, whose reign brought monumental innovations that would leave a lasting legacy on Egyptian civilization. Djoser is known for commissioning the construction of the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, the first great stone monument in history designed by the architect Imhotep, who would become one of the most legendary figures of ancient Egypt. This pyramid is a landmark in the architectural evolution, representing a significant shift from the earlier mastaba tombs to more grandiose and symbolic structures, which would later culminate in the Great Pyramids of Giza. The importance of religion also increased during this period, with the pharaoh being seen not only as a political leader, but as a divine mediator who maintained cosmic order. The construction of grandiose monuments was seen as a way to ensure the pharaoh's immortality and preserve Ma'at, the universal order. Djoser was deified after his death, and his reign set the pattern for how subsequent pharaohs would be remembered. The Third Dynasty also saw an increase in state organization. The bureaucracy was expanded, with officials appointed to administer the vast lands and complex construction projects. In addition, there was an increase in the exploration and extraction of resources, such as limestone and copper, which were necessary for construction and to maintain the wealth and power of the state. This period of political stability and technological advancement set the stage for the height of the Old Kingdom, which would flourish in subsequent dynasties with the development of great pyramids and the consolidation of the pharaoh's centralized power. Old Kingdom and the Age of the Pyramids. The Old Kingdom is known as the Age of the Pyramids, a period of great prosperity and monumental achievements, especially the pyramids at Giza. This era spans the 4th, 5th, and 6th dynasties and is considered the height of the centralization of pharaonic power. Pharaohs were revered as living gods, and their ability to mobilize resources and labor on a massive scale allowed for the construction of some of the greatest architectural wonders in history. The 4th dynasty pharaoh Snefru was one of the most innovators in the field of architecture. He built several pyramids during his reign, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, marking the perfection of the pyramid construction technique. However, it was Pharaoh Khufu, Cheops, his successor, who left the greatest legacy by building the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest of the 3 pyramids at Giza and one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. These pyramids were more than just tombs. They represented the physical manifestation of the pharaoh's absolute power and his direct connection to the gods. Each pyramid was part of a larger complex that included funerary temples and other religious structures. The construction of these pyramids involved thousands of skilled workers and craftsmen, and the logistics involved in these monumental projects reflect the high level of state organization. In addition to the pyramids, the Old Kingdom saw the flowering of Egyptian art and culture. Sculptures, paintings, and reliefs from this period depict the pharaoh as a divine figure, surrounded by scenes of daily life that emphasize order, prosperity, and religious devotion. The tombs of nobles and officials, especially at the Saqqara necropolis, contain examples of this refined art, with their detailed scenes of Egyptian life and rituals. The Old Kingdom was also a time of economic and military expansion. Trade and military expeditions were sent to Sinai, Nubia, and other territories to secure valuable resources such as gold, copper, and precious stones. The centralized power of the pharaoh allowed efficient control over Egypt's vast territory, and scribes and administrators ensured that agricultural production was sufficient to support both the state and building projects. The Old Kingdom began to decline during the 6th dynasty, when the power of regional governors, called nomarchs, began to grow. This weakening of centralized control led to a period of political fragmentation, marking the end of this golden age. First Intermediate Period. After the decline of the Old Kingdom, Egypt entered the First Intermediate Period, circa 2181 to 2055 BC, a time of political, social, and economic crisis. This period was characterized by the disintegration of central power and the rise of competing regional dynasties. The central government in Memphis lost control, and the nomarchs, governors of provinces, became virtually independent, resulting in a fragmentation of power. The collapse of state administration led to a decline in agricultural production, compounded by a series of low-water Nile floods, which caused famine and popular discontent. Inscriptions from this period reflect profound social distress and a breakdown of the established order, in contrast to the stability and prosperity of the Old Kingdom. During this period, Egypt was divided into several regions under the control of different dynasties. Upper Egypt was ruled by kings in Thebes, while Lower Egypt was controlled by other rulers. There was a constant struggle for control of land and resources, with few attempts at unification. The authority of the pharaoh as a divine figure diminished, and the state bureaucracy that had sustained the power of the kingdom began to disintegrate. Despite the disorder, the First Intermediate Period also saw a flourishing of culture in some regions. Funeral art and literature became more accessible to the lower classes, which had previously been the preserve of nobles and royalty. This reflected a democratization of religious and funerary ideals, with more people aspiring to immortality after death. Eventually, the kings of Thebes began to consolidate their power, and under the leadership of Pharaoh Mentuhotep II of Upper Egypt, the country was reunified, marking the end of this chaotic period and the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a new renaissance for Egypt. Second Intermediate Period. After the flourishing of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt again entered a phase of instability known as the Second Intermediate Period, circa 1782 to 1570 BC. This was a time of political fragmentation, during which the country was divided between several local and foreign dynasties competing for control. The main factor characterizing this period was the presence and dominance of the Hyksos, a Semitic people who migrated to Egypt and eventually took control of significant parts of Egyptian territory, especially in the north, settling in the city of Avaris. The Hyksos introduced important technological and military innovations, such as the use of horses, war chariots, and bronze weapons, which were previously unknown to the Egyptians. Although initially viewed as foreign invaders, the Hyksos also adopted many Egyptian traditions and customs, eventually proclaiming themselves pharaohs and ruling in a manner similar to Egyptian kings. While Lower Egypt was under Hyksos rule, Upper Egypt remained in the hands of native Egyptian dynasties centered in Thebes. These Theban kings, although initially subordinate to the Hyksos, eventually began to resist foreign rule. The struggle for independence became a central theme in Upper Egyptian politics, with a series of Theban rulers attempting to expel the Hyksos and restore the unity of Egypt. The conflict culminated in the reigns of the pharaohs Seqenenre-Tao and later his son Ahmose III, who led a successful campaign to expel the Hyksos from Egypt and destroy their capital, Avaris. With Ahmose III's victory, Egypt was reunified, and the Second Intermediate Period came to an end, paving the way for the beginning of the New Kingdom, one of the most glorious eras in Egyptian history. This intermediate period, despite being marked by conflicts, was crucial for Egypt's development in military and cultural terms. Contact with the Hyksos and other foreign cultures brought new technologies and ideas that the Egyptians would take advantage of during the New Kingdom. Ahmose I, upon reuniting Egypt, would become the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, ushering in a new era of power and expansion. New Kingdom. The New Kingdom circa 1570 to 1070 BC is widely considered the height of ancient Egypt's power and glory. Under the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties, Egypt grew into one of the largest empires of antiquity, achieving unprecedented territorial extent and influence. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom expanded Egypt's borders, conquering lands in the Levant, Nubia, and even the borders of the Hittite Empire to the north. The New Kingdom began with the reign of Ahmose I, who, in addition to expelling the Hyksos, launched military expeditions to secure control of Nubia and laid a solid foundation for the expansion of the empire. His military success was followed by other powerful rulers such as Thutmose III, known as the Napoleon of Egypt, who led several successful military campaigns that extended Egyptian control over Canaan, Syria, and parts of the Near East. Another highlight of the New Kingdom is the reign of Pharaoh Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule Egypt as pharaoh. Hatshepsut was an exceptional ruler, promoting great construction and trade projects, such as her famous expedition to the land of Punt. His mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of the jewels of Egyptian architecture. In the 18th dynasty, the reign of Amenhotep III was marked by great prosperity and stability, with the pharaoh promoting art, culture, and diplomacy. His successor, Akhenaten, however, brought great changes by introducing monotheism, promoting the exclusive worship of the god Aten. This radical change caused great religious and social tensions, which culminated in the restoration of polytheism shortly after his death in the brief reign of his son, Tutankhamun. The New Kingdom also saw the rise of another great pharaoh, Ramesses II of the 19th dynasty, widely considered the most powerful of the pharaohs. Ramesses II is remembered for his long life and reign, during which he fought the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites and built colossal monuments such as the Temple of Abu Simbel. Ramesses II was instrumental in consolidating Egypt's military power and securing peace with its neighbors, signing treaties that established lasting diplomatic relations. The end of the New Kingdom, however, was marked by internal and external crises. Pressure from foreign invaders, such as the Sea Peoples, and increasing corruption and political disorder weakened the Egyptian state. By the end of the 20th dynasty, pharaonic power had been progressively eroded, and Egypt began to enter a new period of fragmentation. Third Intermediate Period. The Third Intermediate Period, circa 1070 to 664 BC, was an era of division and decline of central power in Egypt. Following the collapse of the New Kingdom, Egypt entered a phase of political fragmentation, with power being disputed among various factions. Northern Egypt was controlled by Libyan kings, while the south remained under the authority of the priests of Amun, based in Thebes. This period saw the increasing influence of foreign powers, such as the Nubians and later the Assyrians. The kingdom of Kush, Nubia, to the south, grew stronger and eventually conquered Egypt, establishing the 25th dynasty, also known as the Kushite dynasty. Kushite pharaohs such as Pi and Taharqa ruled Egypt and attempted to restore its former glory, promoting the revival of religious and cultural traditions. However, foreign control and internal fragmentation left Egypt vulnerable to invasion. The Assyrians, under the command of Ashurbanipal, invaded Egypt in 664 BC, defeating the Kushites and establishing their rule over the country. This event marks the end of the Third Intermediate Period and Egypt's entry into the Late Period. The Late Period, 664 to 332 BC, was an era of continued instability, marked by foreign invasions and the decline of Egyptian independence. After the Assyrian invasion, Egypt was ruled by local dynasties under the supervision of foreign powers, such as the Persians, who dominated the country on several occasions during the 27th dynasty. During this period, Egypt struggled to regain its former glory, but constant foreign intervention and internal revolts made it difficult to re-establish a strong central power. Egypt's last native ruler, Nectanebo II, was deposed by the Persians in 343 BC, marking the end of Egyptian independence. The Late Period ends with the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BC, which began Macedonian rule over the country. From this point on, Egypt entered the Hellenistic era, and Egyptian civilization began to be influenced by Greek culture, ending millennia of pharaonic sovereignty